I became a millionaire in the New Year's lottery of 2025, and the next day I was poor again. The night of December 31st always had a bittersweet taste for me. I don't know if it was the cold of Chicago or the pressure of the holiday season, but this time always made me reflect on what the year had been and, of course, on what I wanted the next one to be. I was an ordinary guy, without major accomplishments or failures. I saw myself just as another cog in the great clock of life, turning without drawing much attention. Sometimes, I caught myself thinking that time was passing too quickly and without realizing it. I was reaching an age when many people had already accomplished much more than I had. Mike, my longtime friend, was there, as always, laughing and cracking jokes about everything and everyone, as if the world were a big stage for his sarcastic observations. He had always been the kind of guy who cared more about the present than the future. His life was full of unfinished projects, relationships that started and ended quickly, and a constant search for fun. I, on the other hand, was at a moment of transition. What did I want? What truly made me happy? My job in accounting was stable, but also extremely monotonous. It wasn't a job that challenged me. I had always been the type of person who respected the rules, who did what was expected of me, but something inside me was starting to scream for more. I wanted a change, a chance to do something big, something that would take me out of this dull life. While Mike talked about his latest adventures and joked about his plans for the new year, my mind wandered to a different place. I knew the new year was an opportunity for a fresh start, but what would I do to make this year really different? I found myself looking out the window, watching the fireworks in the sky, and for a moment, a strange feeling overtook me. It was a mix of nostalgia, as if time were passing and I wasn't living in the way I truly wanted. It was at that moment that Mike made a suggestion that, at first, seemed simple but somehow hit me with an unexpected weight. He mentioned the lottery, laughing at the idea that maybe it was time to try our luck. Have you ever thought about trying? John, what if we hit it and change our lives? Huh? I laughed, of course, because that was Mike's thing, always looking for the next adventure, the next chance to change things up. But for some reason, that night, the idea of trying my luck appealed to me more than usual. I had always bought tickets here and there, but never seriously. They were more like those random purchases, a small vote of hope. But now it felt different. There was something in my mind telling me that maybe the lottery was exactly what I needed to change the course of my life. I knew the odds of winning were practically non-existent. The probabilities were overwhelmingly against me. My rational mind told me it was a waste of time, but something inside me said, what if? What if this was my big moment? What if, somehow, I was one of the few lucky ones? It wasn't just the idea of winning money, but the idea of having a real opportunity to change, to finally achieve everything I dreamed of. I was tired of the dull life. What I wanted most was to break free from the cycle, from the suffocating routine of a job that didn't fulfill me. I wanted a chance to dream big, to go beyond what life had offered me. I didn't hesitate for long. That night, an impulsive idea took over me. I stood up from the table, telling Mike I was going for a quick walk to the convenience store to buy a ticket. He laughed and made a joke about how, if I won, he would take half, but I didn't mind. I left, my heart racing faster than usual. Those small decisions have something magical about them, a mix of excitement and anxiety. And that night, I felt exactly that. The store was empty, except for the cashier, who was playing a game on his phone. Without much ceremony, I asked for a lottery ticket and paid. The simple act of holding that piece of paper made my mind start firing with ideas of a new life. A life where money wouldn't be a barrier, where I could live my dreams without limitations. I returned home with the ticket in my hand, and holding it made me feel something I hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. It wasn't just the hope of winning money, but of finally having a real chance to change. I didn't know yet, but that lottery ticket, with its unlikely promise of wealth, was about to change my life forever. I looked at the ticket as I lay down, a spontaneous smile appearing on my face. The clock was ticking close to midnight, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop. I was no longer just an ordinary man. I was someone with the chance to be more, to do more. And for a brief moment, everything seemed possible. The sound of the TV woke me up in the morning, the sound of the New Year's lottery drawing coverage echoing through the room. That was usually a moment of pure distraction for me. But that morning, it felt different. I had been awake for a while, but I was just lying in bed, still absorbing the emotions from the night before. The lottery ticket was tucked away in the drawer of my nightstand, as if it were a secret, a small promise of something grand. The TV programming started announcing the lucky numbers, and somehow, I felt compelled to watch. I knew the chances of winning were slim, but something told me that this could be my big moment. I hardly realized how anxious I was until I saw the television screen displaying the winning numbers. 6, 8, 16, 23, 42, 55, the announcer said dramatically, while the camera showed a sequence of numbered balls being drawn from a machine. I was sitting on the couch, watching closely each number, my body tense with expectation. Like in slow motion, the numbers passed through my mind. It happened quickly, but almost dreamlike, as if everything around me were in slow motion. I wasn't really paying attention to what was happening in my life at that moment. I was completely immersed in that sequence of numbers, trying to connect the ticket with the numbers being drawn. For a moment, the world outside disappeared. Then, finally, came the most important part, the check. My heart raced as I pulled the lottery ticket from the drawer, my hand trembling. I looked at the numbers on the ticket, comparing them with the ones on TV. What I saw made me freeze. It was as if time had stopped. I was paralyzed with emotion. 6, 8, 16, 23, 42, 55. I checked again, and once more. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was the exact combination. All the numbers on the ticket were there, exactly as they had been drawn. It was impossible. I looked at the TV screen, then back at the ticket, and the feeling of shock mixed with euphoria. I wasn't seeing things wrong. I was really seeing it. I had just won $300 million in the lottery. The feeling was indescribable, as if all the weight of the world had been lifted from my shoulders. With trembling hands, I placed the ticket on the table. I was alone at home, and my first reaction was to laugh, as if I were waiting for someone to appear and tell me it was a joke. But no one appeared, and reality became clearer and clearer. I was looking at the chance to change my life forever. What would I do with all that? I didn't know, but the thought of having financial freedom, no longer needing to worry about bills, rent, and all the other small things that weighed on my routine, was such a sweet, tempting thought. I began to imagine all the things I could do, the trips I could take, the houses I could buy, the people I could help. I knew my life was about to change radically. All those dreams I had, all those wishes that had stayed on paper, now seemed possible. It was then that I realized the madness of what was happening. I had won. I had $300 million in my hands, or at least it seemed that way. The feeling of excitement grew and took over me. I stood up and started pacing around the room, not knowing how to react. I felt an overwhelming energy, as if it were a new beginning, the best of all beginnings. Before I knew it, I grabbed the phone and started typing to my mom. I didn't care that it was still early. What mattered was the urgency I felt to share the news with her. It was something so big that it felt like it couldn't fit inside me, and I needed to tell someone. I just didn't know where to start. I won, Mom. I won the lottery. It's $300 million, I wrote, not thinking much about the words. I was overflowing with emotion, not knowing exactly what to say or how. I just sent the message. Then, I called Mike. Mike, you won't believe it. I won $300 million. His voice was in a way I had never heard before. He was as excited as I was, and the conversation was a mix of laughter, exclamations, and plans. We didn't know how it would happen, but we knew our lives had changed forever. I couldn't stop smiling. It felt like the whole world was in my favor, as if I had been chosen to live a modern-day fairy tale. I had $300 million. It was even hard to say it out loud. It felt like a parallel reality, a dream. A normal life, with bills to pay, daily work, and trivial worries, had been replaced by a scene of pure freedom. The idea of having the power to do whatever I wanted, without any financial limitations, left me almost euphoric. That morning, after checking the numbers, was a whirlwind. I called all my friends and family, barely able to control my enthusiasm. My mom, Mike, and even old co-workers were the first to hear the news. Their reactions? Totally insane. I had the money, but they also seemed to gain something from it, as if the victory was a collective prize. You're going to help me get out of debt, right? Mike asked, his voice full of expectation, already starting to dream of his share. Of course, man, of course, I replied, not even hesitating. I didn't even think about what this meant. That spontaneous generosity wasn't just about the money, but about what it symbolized. I had the power to change the lives of everyone around me, to give them what they had always wanted. And, in a way, That gave me immense pleasure. I felt more than just an ordinary man, I was a walking miracle. The phone wouldn't stop ringing. I had already told all my close friends and family. Even my ex-girlfriend, Sarah, called. She, always optimistic and with a hint of hope, seemed to not believe what she was hearing. "I'm heading your way now. Let's celebrate this moment," she said, with a smile in her voice. As I waited for her to arrive, my mind was racing 1,000 miles an hour. I was already starting to plan everything I would do with the money. Houses, cars, trips. I didn't know where to begin. Everything seemed possible, and there were no limits. But the first thing I did was make a mental list of what I would buy: a huge house, a trip around the world, a Ferrari, new clothes, things that had been beyond my reach before. My mom arrived soon after Sarah. I saw her walk through the door with shining eyes, completely incredulous. She looked younger, more excited than ever. Of course, I knew she was emotional, but it also gave me some relief to see her so happy. After all I had ever wanted was to secure a better future for her. "John, I can't believe it. Is this real?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Yes, Mom, it's real. Now we can travel the world. I'll pay for everything you need. You don't have to worry about anything anymore," I replied, smiling. It felt so natural, as if I were talking about something simple, a conversation about vacations or a trip to the mall. But deep down, the weight of that statement haunted me. With conversations and laughter spreading through the house, I was starting to realize the magnitude of what I had just achieved. I was surrounded by people who felt like part of this great victory, as if, somehow, my luck was everyone's luck. I had barely begun to realize that this happiness wasn't just mine, it was everyone's, and the responsibility of pleasing everyone was growing quickly. Somewhere inside me, I knew all of this was moving too fast. That night, after all the calls and celebrations, I couldn't sleep. The excitement was consuming me. I found myself lying in bed, tossing and turning, thinking about what had just happened. It was like being at the center of a hurricane, with emotions swirling in a mix of euphoria and anxiety. How could everything change so quickly? I had $300 million, but I still couldn't fully understand the impact of it. And then, I started to question, what now? What would I do with all of this? How would I manage it? I was letting enthusiasm take over, but a part of me still had doubts. I knew that with money, everything could change, including me. I could lose control, get lost in a life of excess, or worse, I could feel emptier than ever. But at that moment, those worries felt distant. I was too busy dreaming. "John, let's go out for dinner," Sarah said to me in the morning, trying to get me out of bed. I agreed without thinking, willing to do anything to enjoy the moment. That evening, we went to a fancy restaurant, and the waiter treated us like celebrities. The champagne was always full, and I didn't know where to stop. Every glass was an excuse to smile more, laugh more, and tell the story to anyone who would listen. With my stomach full and my head light, I felt invincible. What could go wrong now? The first thing I did when I woke up was open my eyes and remember. I had $300 million. It was as if a new day had begun, but in a different way. There was nothing left to limit me, nothing I couldn't reach. I was consumed by the idea of infinite possibilities. The money wasn't just a tool. It represented freedom, power, and a chance to transform my life and the lives of others. I was in the bathroom, still with the feeling that everything was a dream, when the idea appeared. The first plan, the first thing to do, and I knew I couldn't wait. "I'm going to buy a house," I said to myself, almost in a whisper. The house I wanted, a mansion, with a pool, a golf course, and a view that could be seen from any point on the planet. I wanted something that would truly represent my new reality, something grand. And then, I thought about everything the house would need: a huge library, a private cinema, a professional kitchen, everything I could dream of. I knew there was nothing out of my reach, so I made another mental list. Beach house in Hawaii, new car, travel the world, help my mom achieve her dreams. I saw myself sitting there on the bed, with total control of my life. No more challenges, no more bills, no more waiting to get something. And that's when the ideas started multiplying. I wanted everyone around me to know what I was doing. I wanted to give my mom the house of her dreams, a place where she could finally rest. I wanted to offer my friends opportunities they would never have imagined. With money, I could be the hero of everyone, the one who makes dreams come true. It was as if I had been blessed with a divine mission to help everyone who was close to me. So, I started making calls. The first one was to my mom. "Mom, I'm buying a house for us. It's going to be a mansion. I'm going to give you everything you've always wanted," I said with an excitement that still made me tremble. She was silent for a moment, but then responded with a smile in her voice. "Oh, John, you really did it? I can't believe this is real." I spent the rest of the day in a state of almost frantic excitement. I thought of old friends, people I had lost touch with, and called them all. Deep down, maybe I was trying to prove something to myself. I didn't know exactly what, but I knew that money gave me the power to be someone more important. Someone who could change lives. Generosity seemed to be the key, but at the same time, I felt a growing pressure. I didn't know what to do first. Every call, every message, every promise made me think that the next one was the most important thing in the world. I was getting lost in the whirlwind of everything that was possible. I promised trips to friends, paid off debts of people who hadn't spoken to me in years. I wanted everyone to know what I was doing, and I wanted everyone to feel like I did, in control of their lives. In the meantime, one thing stood out in my mind: I needed to get rid of everything that held me back. The work, the routine, the limitations. I started thinking about my boss and my job in the office. I didn't want that anymore. I didn't want to spend my days behind a computer, dealing with repetitive tasks. I wanted to live. I wanted to make the most of life. And so, impulsively, I made a decision. Without thinking about the consequences, without evaluating anything, I went to my computer, opened the office email, and typed the message: "I'm resigning. I don't need this anymore. Life is more than working 9 to 5. Now, I'm following new paths." I hit send. That was it. I was free. No more strings. No more boss. No more meetings. I had the money. I had the freedom. But even as I typed those words, I felt a strange sensation. I didn't know if I had done the right thing, but deep down, that doubt felt small compared to the idea of being able to start over, to rewrite my story. I was starting to believe that the promises made were enough. I would do my part. Work, responsibility, everything that came with it would be left behind. There was no more room for that. Life would now be one big party of indulgences, unforgettable moments, and impossible achievements. And I was about to start. That night, I couldn't think of anything but everything I had already promised. Everything I had planned, and everything I still wanted to achieve. What was once a dream now felt like an obligation. The feeling of being in a movie, in a modern fairy tale, didn't leave me for a second. What comes after a whole day of plans, promises, and overwhelming euphoria? Silence. A sleepless night. A night where the mind doesn't stop working, trying to organize the chaos of ideas, thoughts, and dreams. It was a constant battle between the enthusiasm of a grand future and the growing feeling that something wasn't right. I couldn't sleep. While the city outside seemed to follow its pace, I was trapped in a spiral of thoughts. Every passing second seemed to take me further away from the reality I had lived until yesterday, and I felt like a completely different person. And, at the same time, there was something uncomfortable about the total freedom I now had. How could I handle this? The dreams were big, even grandiose. Each new thought seemed bigger than the previous one. I saw myself again in the new house, on the beach, with the family gathered, all smiling and happy, my friends by my side, living a life without financial worries. It's going to be perfect, I thought, but deep down, there was discomfort. It was as if I was trying to fill a void that, until that moment, I hadn't even known existed. I tried to push these thoughts away, convincing myself that everything was exactly as it should be. I had control. I had power. As the hours passed, anxiety grew. I found myself once again staring at the lottery ticket, as if the proof of my victory was right there in front of me. Was it possible? Was it really possible that just yesterday, I was a completely different person, struggling to pay the bills and dealing with the daily hardships? Outside, the clock showed an hour ahead, and I was still lying there, wide awake, immersed in this whirlwind. How could I sleep? I only had one day. Just one day to change everything, and I was too anxious to rest. What if I messed everything up? What if I didn't know how to handle the new life awaiting me? As the clock ticked on and the shadows of the night lengthened, I began to think about what really mattered: my mom, my friends, the people who were waiting for me to fulfill all the promises I had made. And how would I do that? How could I give them everything they needed without losing my own identity in the process? That night felt like the longest of all. My mind, always racing, seemed unwilling to stop. More and more, I thought about the promises I had made, the commitments I had taken on, and what else I needed to do. But something told me I might be moving too fast. I didn't exactly know what I was doing, but somehow, I felt like things were getting out of control. At dawn, physical exhaustion began to set in, but my mind remained restless. I knew something was coming, something that wouldn't be as easy as I had thought. And despite all the promises and plans, I couldn't shake a certain fear. It was the kind of quiet fear, the one that comes from within, that makes you question everything you thought you knew about yourself. How would I handle the weight of the responsibility that was about to fall on my shoulders? But when I looked at the ticket again, something inside me told me everything was fine. I had made the right choices. Now, I just had to act. When I woke up that morning, the feeling that I couldn't go back became clearer than ever. The excitement that had taken over me in the last few hours was beginning to mix with a subtle, yet growing doubt. Still, I couldn't deny what I felt. I was on top of the world, or at least, that's how it seemed. I sat at the kitchen table, still holding the lottery ticket in my hand, and began to think about the decisions I had made. Each one seemed impulsive and risky, but there was something fascinating about it. The world was at my feet, and I felt like I needed to seize it immediately. But my mind was still occupied with one thing: work. My work. What would I do with it? I had spent years behind a desk, listening to customers' complaints and dealing with tasks that seemed endless. Spreadsheets, emails, endless meetings. I had always dreamed of leaving, but never really acted on it. Until now. Now I had $300 million, and that changed everything. I looked at the computer, where my boss's email was open. I could simply take a step back, reflect a little more, think about the consequences. But no. I was at a point of no return. There was no room for insecurity or hesitation anymore. It was time to be who I really wanted to be. And I knew that meant saying goodbye to my job, my boss, my old life. My hands were sweaty as I typed the message. I could have been more careful. Maybe I could have given a better explanation or a notice. But at that moment, impulsiveness took over. After all, who needed a notice when you had millions, right? The job no longer made sense. I felt like I was trapped in a world that now seemed irrelevant to me. The message was short and direct: I'm resigning. I don't need this anymore. Life is more than this. I appreciate the opportunity, but I'm moving on. Sincerely, John. I hit send as quickly as I had made the decision. The feeling of freedom I had in that moment was overwhelming. But I couldn't ignore the uncomfortable feeling that immediately followed. What if it was a mistake? But the doubts quickly faded. I had money now. I could do whatever I wanted. There was no need to be tied to a job that had never made me happy. I didn't need to justify my choices anymore. I was free. I got up from the table and began walking around the house. Each step felt lighter, more confident. I was living a new life. And with that thought, the anxiety suddenly disappeared. I was in control. I could do whatever I wanted. As I paced back and forth, I called the real estate agent. The house I wanted seemed within my reach. The agent was as excited as I was, and we quickly began discussing the best options, the details of the purchase, what needed to be done. All you need to do is sign a few papers, John, and the house will be yours. You'll love it. It's everything you've always wanted. I couldn't contain my smile. It was incredible to think that my life was changing so quickly. But as excited as I was about the idea of the new house and all the promises I had made, something inside me still told me that this decision to quit my job was risky. But at the same time, that didn't seem to matter. I didn't want to turn back. Not now. With the lottery ticket in hand, I walked to the window and looked outside. The sky was clear, the sun was shining, and everything seemed perfect. I was ready for whatever the future held. It was time to live. I hadn't finished making all the calls yet, but I already felt a slight pressure regarding the promises I had made. The words had slipped out of my mouth without much thought about the consequences. Those promises made in the heat of the moment were now becoming a very real part of my new life. And somehow, that started to weigh on me. I couldn't just back out. First, I called my mom. She was the easiest. She always had that calm demeanor, always knew how to listen without rushing, which made me feel like she could understand anything I had to say. I imagined she'd be so happy, but I couldn't avoid a feeling of guilt as I spoke with her. It wasn't really guilt for being happy, but for how quickly things had changed. I felt like I was moving too fast. Mom, you won't believe it. I won. Yes, that's right. I won the lottery. $300 million. We can do everything we've always dreamed. Her voice, initially silent, took shape, and I could hear the excitement mixed with disbelief. Her happiness was genuine, but I couldn't help but notice the note of concern that came at the end of the conversation. Are you sure, John? I just want you to be careful. I know life will be different now, but don't lose yourself. Don't lose what's important. This money doesn't define you. I paused for a moment, absorbing her words. Of course, I knew she was right, but at that moment, the idea of having everything I'd ever wanted was so seductive that I ignored the discomfort creeping at the back of my mind. I had millions of reasons to believe that my life was about to be irrevocably transformed. My mom might be right, but I was determined to seize the chance. Next, I called my friends. When I told them what had happened, I heard laughter and exclamations. They were as excited as I was, maybe even more. Soon, they started asking me to fund some luxuries for them: a trip to Las Vegas, new cars, dinners at expensive restaurants. I couldn't resist and made more promises. Of course, guys, let's all go to Las Vegas. Let's throw a big party. And anyone who wants a new car, just let me know. The words were coming out of my mouth without a filter, and something inside me knew it wouldn't be as simple as it seemed. But excitement took over. I wanted to see everyone happy. I wanted everyone to know that I could now be what they had always dreamed. However, with every call, a sense of discomfort began to grow within me. It wasn't guilt, but a silent pressure, a feeling that I was carrying the weight of an uncertain future on my shoulders. The promises I had made were big, too big. I was offering things I couldn't be sure I could deliver. Deep down, I knew I would promise more than I could fulfill. The phone rang again, and this time it was my brother, James. He was even more excited than anyone else, but the conversation soon took a more serious turn. John, you know what this means, right? It means we have to help people. Mom, friends, even bigger causes. You have to make a difference now. It's not just about spending on luxury, man. This is the time to give back to the world. Promise me that. I hesitated. He was right, I knew that. But the idea of donating part of the fortune, of doing something really meaningful, seemed harder than I had imagined. Generosity had always sounded good to me. But now, with so much power in my hands, I was more confused about how to position myself. Of course, I'll help whoever needs it, I said, not really knowing if I was being sincere or just trying to reassure myself. When I hung up, a feeling of emptiness began to consume me. It wouldn't be easy to live up to these promises. More and more, the pressure was building. I didn't know if I was ready to be the world savior or the irresponsible millionaire making empty promises. As the day went on, I realized my new life was starting to form a big puzzle, and the pieces weren't fitting as perfectly as I had imagined. I wanted to be the hero of the story, but what would I do if I wasn't able to fulfill everything I said? How would I handle all the promises I had made? The next morning came with a surreal clarity. I was on the road to something big, but it was still hard to process everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. The promises made, the work left behind, the feeling that life would be different from now on. Everything felt like a whirlwind of emotions and decisions. But I knew the next step was the most important. I needed to claim the prize. The money, the true proof that my life would never be the same. The car seemed to fly down the road as I drove to the bank. The sun reflected off the windows of my vehicle, and for a moment, I felt as if I were floating. My heart raced, the anxiety mixed with a sense of euphoria. What could go wrong? I had won the lottery, I was rich, and now, I just had to claim my prize. Everything I had dreamed of was within reach. The bank was in the city center, an imposing building with a glass and steel facade. I had an appointment with the manager, Karen, an elegant and efficient woman I had known from previous transactions. She was one of the first people to know about my prize when I called to confirm the details of what I would need to claim the amount. I parked and entered the building, feeling the cool air from the air conditioning, the smell of coffee, and the soft hum of conversations in the background. I went straight to the counter, where an attendant directed me to the meeting room, where Karen was waiting. The room was silent, with a glass table and a few chairs arranged around it. Karen smiled when she saw me enter, but there was something in her gaze that I couldn't identify. "John, it's a pleasure to see you. I'm glad you've made it this far. I've been waiting for you," she said, sounding polite, but something told me she was being cautious. I smiled back, feeling a pang of nervousness. "Me too. I'm eager to see the process. How do we do this?" She had me sit down and began opening files on her computer, but something in her expression changed when she looked at the monitor and then looked at me again. The room's lighting seemed to dim suddenly. John, before we go any further, we need to discuss some details about your ticket, she began, her tone more serious than expected. I looked at her, confused. Details? Isn't everything fine? I checked the numbers. Everything matched perfectly. Karen paused. I really hope you check the numbers more carefully, John. I know the excitement is big, but we need to make sure everything is correct. She then handed me a printout, something that seemed to be a copy of my ticket. I looked at it, and everything seemed fine. The numbers were there, clearly visible. But as I looked closer, something hit me like a cold wave. The last digits were slightly different from what I had checked at home the night before. This can't be real, I whispered, unable to process what was happening. The numbers can't be wrong. Karen took a deep breath, and for the first time, her eyes showed a compassion I wasn't expecting. John, I'm afraid there was a checking error. You might have glanced at the numbers too hastily and made a mistake. Your ticket is not the winning one, John. Unfortunately, you didn't win. The shock overwhelmed me. I was hearing it, but I couldn't understand. The world around me started spinning. It couldn't be true. I couldn't have made such a fatal mistake. But the reality was harder to accept than any dream I had created. I looked at her, feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. No, it can't be. How can you say that? I checked the numbers with all my attention. This is impossible. Karen tried to be understanding. I know, John. I understand your frustration. The problem is that the numbers you checked are not correct. They don't match the ones drawn. What you have here is a ticket that doesn't correspond to the prize. Those words echoed in my head, and I felt dizzy. What would I do now? I had already taken the first step toward a new life. I had made promises. I had decided that wealth was within my reach. How could I just go back to my old life? I made a mistake, I asked, almost whispering. The reality was beginning to seep in, slowly, like poison. She nodded slowly. Unfortunately, yes. The ticket is wrong. Silence settled in the room. I couldn't find any words. What more could I say? I had lost everything. The promises, the fantasies, the grand plans. All of it now seemed distant, like a dream that vanished as soon as I woke up. I left the room slowly, my body heavy, as if I were walking through thick fog. The world around me had changed. I had lost everything, and now the only sound I could hear was my own labored breathing. What would I do now? How would I face everything I had said? How would I step down from the pedestal I had placed myself on, back to reality? I was outside the bank now, but Karen's words were still hammering in my head. I couldn't understand how this had happened. Everything I had built in the last few hours, all the plans I made with such enthusiasm, was collapsing on top of me. I didn't know what to do, where to go, or how to explain what had happened. My phone was in my hand, and the screen was glowing with notifications of messages and calls. The first thing I did was check the messages from my friends and family. They had been as excited as I was the night before, but now, how would I explain that it had all been a lie, a mistake? How would I tell everyone that the big turning point of my life was nothing more than an illusion? The notifications kept popping up on my screen, and one of them was from my mother. I couldn't stop thinking about her. She always believed I would achieve something great, something that would change my life for the better. How could I face her expectations now? How could I look at her and say that, instead of being the hero she expected, I was just another man who had made a stupid mistake? I decided to call her, even though I knew I wouldn't have enough words to calm her disappointment. The phone rang a few times before she answered. Hi, my love. How are you? Did you go to the bank? Her voice was full of hope, and it hit me like a punch in the stomach. I couldn't answer immediately. I wanted to tell the truth, but the words seemed stuck in my throat. I took a deep breath and finally said, Mom, I made a mistake. I didn't win. She was silent for a moment, and I could feel her expectation crumbling. What? How is it that you didn't win, John? You sent me a picture of the ticket. You said you checked the numbers. I closed my eyes, trying to process the pain her words caused me. I thought I checked it right. I was so sure I had won. But the bank, they said the ticket was wrong. It's not the winner. Mom, the silence on the other end of the line was heavier than any scream. I could imagine her expression of shock, disbelief, as she tried to absorb what I had just said. So everything you told me, everything you promised, she began, her voice trembling. It was a lie. I felt the shame tightening in my chest. How could I explain that? In my excitement, in my rush to live a dream, I had started a fairy tale that had now turned into a nightmare. The promises made, the money I said I would give her and others, all of it was slipping away like water through my fingers. It wasn't a lie, Mom. I really believed that I had won. I just didn't know I was wrong. I don't know what to do now. Her breathing grew heavier, and I could hear the sound of a deep sigh. John, you can't turn back time. I understand it was a mistake, but you need to take responsibility now. This is about your life, not just what you promised. I had no answer to that. She was right, of course. The responsibility was mine now, and there was no room for excuses anymore. I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry for making you believe this. I'll try to fix everything. I'll make up for my mistakes. She sighed once more. You will, my son, but now, be more careful. Learn from this. It's not the end of the world, but it's a lesson. I ended the call, but the weight of what she said stayed with me. It was a painful reminder that I could no longer live in a world of illusions. I needed to face reality, but the consequences were just beginning. The promises I made to everyone, the dreams I sold, were starting to fall apart. I needed to call my friends and family. I needed to undo everything I had said, everything I had promised. Shame consumed me. How could I possibly reverse this? How could I face the people who had believed in me and tell them it was all just a foolish mistake? When I called my first friend, my chest tightened. Man, I messed up. I really thought I had won, but the ticket was wrong. I'm not a millionaire. He was silent for a long moment. I could hear his breathing on the other end of the line, as if he were trying to understand what I was saying. You're saying that all of this was a lie? He finally asked. Yes, I was saying that. I had accidentally lied, given false hope, and now, I didn't know how to apologize or justify everything I had done. The other friends were the same. They were all upset, some even angry. No one cursed me directly, but the disappointment was evident. And the most painful part, I felt like I had lost their trust. I didn't know what to do anymore. The mistake I made seemed irreversible. Not only had I ruined myself, but I had also affected the people around me. I just wanted to go back, do everything differently. What was left now? What would I do to move forward? The weight of shame wasn't something I could just brush aside. It was a constant burden, a weight on my chest that seemed to grow with every passing minute. After the calls, I felt small, helpless, as if I had failed in an irreparable way. And the worst part was that I knew this mistake wasn't a simple one. I couldn't just say sorry and expect everything to go back to normal. The disappointment in the voices of my friends and family was a constant reminder that, somehow, I had betrayed them. Shortly after the calls, I started walking aimlessly. The streets were emptier than usual for late morning, perhaps because the rest of the world was still immersed in New Year celebrations. For them, the year was starting with promises and possibilities. But for me, it was beginning with a huge lesson in humility. I felt ridiculous. The idea of being the guy who won the lottery, the man who could suddenly change everyone's life around him, was ruined by a simple mistake of checking numbers. In everything I had done, the resignation letter, the promises of donations, the grand plans now seemed like a tragic comedy film, where the protagonist, in the end, realizes he is only digging himself deeper. I stopped in a square, looking at the empty benches and the trees that still carried traces of winter. The sun was high, but I couldn't feel any warmth. Only the cold of shame enveloped me. People passed by me without noticing my presence, and somehow, that gave me a sense of relief. Maybe it would be better if I disappeared, became invisible for a while. I didn't want to face anyone, didn't want to hear more words of disappointment. That's when my phone rang again. It was an unknown number. I hesitated for a moment, but with a sigh, I answered. John, the voice on the other end was from a woman, but I didn't recognize her immediately. It's me, Karen, from that bank. My mind did a flip. She was calling me. What did she want now? I still couldn't process what had happened earlier, but her voice didn't sound angry, just curious. Hi, Karen, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though I knew I sounded completely broken. What happened? Do you have any news about the mistake? She paused before speaking. Look, I thought about it a little more. And I might have been a bit harsh with you. I really didn't think this mistake would cause so much confusion. I hope you understand that the procedure is what it is, and it's just a check error. It happens, but you'll get through it. I was stunned. She was being understanding. I really didn't expect that reaction. Are you telling me that you're going to help me fix this? I asked, not believing what I was hearing. I really don't know what to do now. She took a deep breath, and I could sense the sincerity in her voice. Well, it's not something I can fix, but I can try to help you understand what happened and how to resolve things in a more controlled way. I know you're going through a tough time, but you need to be honest with everyone, especially your family and friends. We can't hide the truth. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. The shame was so deep that there weren't enough words to express it. Yes, you're right. I have to do this. And it's going to be very hard. I know it is. But you can start now. Honesty is always the first step. After that brief conversation, I hung up and stood there, watching life continue around me as if nothing had happened. To the world, I was still just an ordinary man. But for me, everything had changed. Reality had set in, and now I had to deal with the consequences. Shame was the hardest feeling to deal with. It surrounded me, suffocated me, and even after the clarity from my conversation with Karen, I knew the emotional pain I was feeling wouldn't be easily overcome. What I did wasn't just a common mistake, but something that affected the trust of those around me. I had turned a dream into a lie, and now I had to pay the price. And indeed, the price was high, not only with broken promises, but with the realization that greed and the rush to live something grand had blinded me to what really mattered. I decided to go back home. I didn't want to face anyone else that day. The weight of shame followed me with every step, as if it had anchored itself on my shoulders. But when I entered the house, it was impossible to avoid the last person I needed to talk to: my mom. She was in the kitchen, stirring something on the stove. And when she saw me, she paused for a moment, her gaze more attentive than usual. "Are you okay, John?" she asked, her voice soft, but full of concern that only a mother can have. I couldn't hide it anymore. I simply sat down, resting my head in my hands. "Mom, I did everything wrong," I said. I made such a stupid mistake. I thought I had won the lottery. And now, it's all a lie. I'm not a millionaire. None of this is real." She came over and sat next to me, placing her hand on my shoulder. "John, we all make mistakes. That doesn't define you. What defines you is how you deal with them. It's going to be tough, I know, but you'll come out of this stronger." Those words, simple but full of meaning, gave me some relief. The shame was still there, but I knew that, at least, my mom was by my side. It would still be hard, but maybe, with time, I could find a way to redeem myself. The next morning was a blur. What had once seemed like a day of celebration, filled with dreams and hopes, was now surrounded by a cloak of regret. I barely managed to sleep the previous night. Every time I closed my eyes, the feeling of having destroyed my own life and some people's lives around me came back full force. I knew I had to act, that I couldn't sit around lamenting what I'd done, but at the same time, I felt an enormous block. How could I undo what I'd done? How could I reverse what seemed irreparable? So I decided to start with the resignation. The first big mistake. I knew that by sending that email to my boss, I had burned bridges. What I didn't expect was how I'd have to live with the consequences of that. It wasn't just about a job. It was about my identity. And now, without that identity, I felt lost. I was just another man trying to figure out what to do with the remnants of the life I'd built. I picked up my phone. Hesitant, I took a deep breath, and as I dialed the office number, the words came out slowly. My voice sounded strange to me, like it belonged to someone else. "Hi, it's John. I need to speak with Mr. Walker." Walker, my boss, didn't take long to answer. I knew he was waiting for something. Maybe it was time for a reprimand. Perhaps the last of many that I had avoided. But at that moment, I knew there was no turning back. "John, I've thought about what you did. I read your email. You know you can't go back now, right?" Those words hit me like a bucket of cold water. I knew it was true, but hearing it so clearly only made the weight heavier. Walker was right. I couldn't go back. The resignation was already done, but his words kept echoing in my mind, amplifying the sense of failure. "Yes, I know," I muttered, almost in a whisper. "I know I made a mistake. I wanted to try to fix this." He sighed. "It's not that simple, John. What you did affected not only the company, but also the way people saw you. People won't forget it anytime soon. Neither will I." I knew he was right. The arrogance I had felt yesterday, thinking I was finally doing something grand, was now being shattered by a simple mistake. A wrong analysis of numbers. A hope that vanished in seconds. "You're going to have to deal with this, John. There's no going back now," he said, and the line fell silent for a long moment. I hung up the phone with a sense of defeat that still haunted me. Now, not only had I lost the chance to be a millionaire, but also the job I had taken for granted. How could I explain this to the people who believed I was improving? Who thought I had finally made the right decision? Now, I was just a man who had made the biggest mistake of his life. And the damage didn't stop there. I had to deal with the promises I had made, the donations, the grand promises to help others. How would I explain to everyone that I no longer had money? That it had all been a mistake? It would be humiliating. I wasn't prepared for this, but I knew I had to face it. I couldn't keep running away. The first person I decided to call was my sister, Sarah. She was at an event with the family, and she could hardly imagine what she was about to hear. "John, what's wrong? Are you okay?" She sounded so cheerful on the other end of the line. Maybe she thought I was calling to share good news. The mistake was still fresh for me, but I knew I needed to be honest. "Sarah, I made a mistake. I didn't win the lottery. I don't have 300 million. It was a mistake in the number check." I don't even know how to explain this to you." There was a long silence. I could feel the shock through the phone, like a cold wave sweeping through the room. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter, calmer, but with visible sadness. "John, you couldn't have done this. You made promises, took actions, and now, it's all gone." I wanted to apologize, but the words failed me. The shame once again took over, like a dark shadow. I didn't know how to fix what I had done. How could I apologize for letting myself be so reckless? I know, Sarah, I know. I don't know what got into me. I thought it was all real, and it's not. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she sighed deeply. "I just don't know how you got to this point, John. I expected you to have more clarity. I hope you learned from this." I wished she had been kinder. I wished she'd said something to make me feel better. But deep down, I knew she was right. I hadn't been clear. I was blinded by greed, by the desire to escape mediocrity. After hanging up with Sarah, I felt the weight of the consequences on my chest. The shame was now accompanied by the feeling of having lost control, and I had no idea how to start dealing with all of this. Attempts to reverse things began to feel more and more useless. It wouldn't be possible to simply go back in time and undo the decisions I had made. I couldn't erase the promises made, the firing sent, the major decisions I had made impulsively. But the only thing I could do now was move forward. I don't know how. I don't know when. But the only path was to rebuild what I had destroyed. The journey back home was the longest and most painful of my life. What should have been a relief, a day that would finally end, felt like a punishment. The day was already ending, the sun setting on the horizon, and I sat in the car, hands on the wheel, my mind spinning, each thought heavier than the last. With every mile, the memories of what I had done made my stomach churn. Every broken promise, every lie I had told myself. How could I have been so reckless? The answer was clear, but I didn't want to face it. Greed, the illusion that life could be solved with a single stroke of luck. I had let it take over, and now I was paying the price. The house looked different when I arrived. When I walked in, silence swallowed me whole. Normally, the sound of the TV, my mom talking to a friend, or background music would greet me, but today, everything was still. The smell of the food she used to prepare wasn't there. What had I done? I had even canceled the plans to celebrate New Year's with my family, believing my luck was about to change forever. Now, I was here, with empty hands, a pale face, and a heavy heart. She looked at me when I entered, surprised to see me so late. "John, what happened? You look strange." Those words hit me hard. My mom didn't know what I had done, didn't know about the mistake, the broken promises, the shame that now weighed on me. She didn't know anything. I made a mistake, Mom," I said, trying to control the emotion in my voice. "I didn't win. I don't have 300 million. It was all a mistake. I was hasty. I made promises I can't keep." I saw the shock on her face, as if the words I had said didn't make sense. She stayed silent for a moment, trying to process what was happening. I could see the thoughts running through her mind, but she didn't say anything. She just watched me, not believing what she had just heard. You're telling me that everything you said, all the promises, all of it, wasn't true?" I wanted to explain better, but the words were stuck in my throat. No matter what I said, the damage had already been done. There was no way to recover what I had lost. No way to convince my mom that I regretted every second of that impulsive decision. "Yes, Mom," I replied with a choked voice. "I thought I had one, but it was a mistake." I don't know how to explain. She slowly got up from the chair, as if every step was a weight. She walked over to me and, with a sigh, hugged me, but not the way she used to. There was no warmth, only an effort to comfort me. I could feel the distance between us, her frustration with what I had done, and the sadness of seeing her son break his own trust. I don't know what you were thinking, John. I thought you had learned to be more responsible over time. Now everything is harder for all of us, she said, her voice hoarse with emotion. What are you going to do now? I had no answer. I didn't know what to do. All I felt was shame, and as she hugged me, I felt as if the weight of my decision had multiplied. It was as if I had destroyed not only my future, but hers as well. There was nothing to do but face reality. I sat there, in silence, not knowing what to say. The idea of a better future dissolved into a cloud of frustration. I had lost something far more important than the opportunity to be rich. I had lost the trust of the people I loved, my own dignity, and the stability I had taken for granted until yesterday. After a few minutes, I pulled away and sat on the couch. I know I'm wrong, Mom, and I'll fix it. But right now, I don't even know where to start. You'll need time to think, John, she replied softly. I know you can learn from this. Just don't let this mistake define who you are. I nodded. Those words gave me a bit of hope, a slight feeling that I could still find a way. I knew I would need much more than words to rebuild what I had lost. But at that moment, the most important thing was having time to reflect, to reorganize my thoughts, and figure out what I could do. When I lay down that night, once again, I couldn't sleep. The mistake, the shame, it all kept swirling in my mind. But at least, at that moment, there was something different. Maybe it was the strength of my mom's words. Maybe it was the small flame of hope that I could learn from this bitter lesson. But whatever it was, I knew I had to move forward. What would come next, I didn't know, but now, I had no choice. The next morning arrived with the sound of the alarm clock breaking the silence of the house. It felt as though time had stopped, as if nothing had changed, but at the same time, everything was different. I still felt empty, a sense of powerlessness that wouldn't leave me. The morning light came through the window, and I stared at it for a moment, not knowing where to begin. The first thing I knew I had to do was face the people. I couldn't stay hidden any longer. The phone calls I made last night were just the beginning. I still needed to talk to each person I had promised something I couldn't deliver. I jumped out of bed, put on something simple, and went to the kitchen. My mom was making breakfast, but the atmosphere was tense. There were no light conversations or plans for the day, like usual. There was a silence hanging between us. A feeling that everything I had done had changed the dynamic of our home, but I knew I needed to speak. My mom wouldn't be the only one who deserved an explanation. I need to call the people. Mom, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, but failing. I have to tell the truth. She looked at me with a tired but understanding expression. I know, son, but take it easy. Don't try to fix everything at once. I nodded and grabbed my phone. The first number on my list was Amanda's, my sister. She had been so excited when I said I won the lottery. I remember her smile, the plans we started to make for the trip to Europe, to help pay for her daughter Mia's college, and even for our parents' house. All those plans were up in the air, fantasies built on something that didn't exist. The call was answered quickly. John, are you okay? I was waiting for your call. Her voice was full of enthusiasm, and it gave me a knot in my stomach. I knew what I had to say, but it seemed so hard. Amanda, I started, swallowing hard. I made a mistake. I didn't win the lottery. I looked at the wrong numbers. I don't have 300 million. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then I heard a low laugh. This is a joke, right? Are you serious? I wished I could say it wasn't, but the weight of the truth was crushing me. I'm serious. I mixed up the numbers. I'm not a millionaire. Everything I said, all the plans, it was a mistake. I couldn't hear anything for a moment, just her breathing. Then, finally, she spoke. You're messing with me, John. I was counting on you. We all were. How could you do this? I closed my eyes, feeling a pain in my chest. I knew Amanda's words were full of frustration and disappointment, but I deserved it. I know, Amanda. I was stupid. I don't know what else to say, she sighed. Well, you'll have to deal with it now. It's not just about you, John. You need to explain to everyone else now. You have no idea what this means to us. I felt crushed. It was true. Every promise made, every dream shared, was now being destroyed. The promises to help with my parents' house debts, the plans to take out a loan for me as business, the trips and gifts I had promised. It all vanished, as if it never existed. I'll fix it, Amanda, I said, my voice now full of regret. I'll do whatever I can to make up for it. She didn't respond immediately. I knew she was processing the pain and disappointment. Finally, she said, "You're going to have to do much more than that, John. But right now, we can't do anything. Let's see what happens. Try to do what's right." I hung up the call and stood there, staring at the phone for a few seconds. How had I gotten to this point? How could I have been so reckless? I didn't know what would come next, but one thing was clear: I had to face the consequences of what I had done. The next number on my list was my boss, Mark. He had been so understanding with me, giving me a chance when I needed time to work on my personal life. Now, I was about to throw it all away because I made the mistake of thinking that one good piece of news would fix everything. I didn't know what he would think of me now, but I had to try. He answered quickly, as he always did. "Hey, John. How's it going?" His voice was cheerful, but there was a slight concern in his tone, as if he knew something was wrong. "Mark, I need to talk to you about something," I said, my voice trembling. I made a mistake. That email I sent saying I was quitting the job. It wasn't true. I didn't win the lottery. I got the numbers wrong. I can't leave the job." He was silent for a moment, and I felt the anxiety rise. "John, you know I don't like surprises, but this is something new." You really left me speechless. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of shame. "I know, Mark, I'm an idiot. I didn't think about what I was doing. I just thought I could change my life overnight." "Well, that's not exactly what happened, is it?" Mark responded, his voice now more serious. "Let's see what we can do. Your position is secure, but I hope you've learned something from this. John, life's not as simple as it seems." I thanked him for his patience and hung up. The conversation wasn't as bad as I'd imagined, but I knew my credibility was shaken. He would still give me a chance, but his words stuck with me. "I hope you've learned something from this." I sat for a moment, reflecting on Mark's words, and I knew he was right. I needed to learn. This mistake had to teach me something I could never forget. When I finally had the chance to rebuild, I should do it with more responsibility, without losing what really mattered. The first part of my journey of explanations was over, but the hardest part was still ahead. I had made the calls. The weight of all the conversations was still suffocating me, and I knew the night would be long, filled with memories of my recklessness. The fact that things were returning to normal, or at least to what I understood as normal, didn't make the pain go away. I felt like I was in limbo, not knowing what to do or how to move forward. The plans for a glorious future had vanished, and I was back at square one. The night came, and with it, insomnia. I couldn't sleep. My body was exhausted, but my mind was in a constant whirlwind. I lay in bed, my eyes fixed on the ceiling, trying to process everything that had happened. I couldn't stop thinking about the future, how everything changed in 24 hours. I had been foolish enough to believe that one move could transform my life. It had been easy to get carried away by the illusion of sudden wealth. The darkness of the night seemed to reflect my thoughts. I was alone with my guilt, with nothing to distract my mind. The walls of the room seemed to get closer, as if the space was too tight for me to hide from reality. I thought about the promises made to my family, the plans to help Amanda, to improve my parents' lives. Thinking about them now only made the pain worse. I had the sense that I had lost not only the chance to change my life, but the trust of the people who mattered most to me. What was left? How could I rebuild after such a fall? The clock on the wall marked AM, but I was still awake, trying to find answers in scattered thoughts. I knew I couldn't continue like this. I needed to face my choices, understand what went wrong, and more importantly, learn from them. But what do you do after such a huge mistake? How do you get something solid back into your hands? Mark's words came back to my mind. Life's not as simple as it seems. I knew he was right. Nothing in life happens easily. And the sudden change in my reality had been an illusion. The lottery, the millions of dollars, the promise of a different life, all of that had been just a dream. I woke up from a nightmare, and now I was facing the consequences. Outside, the wind blew strong, and the trees swayed gently, as if nature was trying to calm me. But the only thing that could calm my mind was the certainty that I needed to change. I couldn't keep being this person, someone who believed that luck would fix everything. I had to rebuild my life from scratch, and that would start with accepting reality, without fantasies. The day broke with a gray tone. Reflecting my state of mind, I already knew that the night wouldn't bring me the answers I was looking for. The only thing left to do was try to move forward, learn to deal with the consequences, and maybe, someday, rebuild the trust of the people around me. It was time to start over. The sun was already high when I finally got out of bed. The first hours of the morning were as difficult as the night before. The reality of not having won the $300 million was settling deep within me. The feeling of having lost something valuable, of having gotten so close and, at the same time, of being deceived by my own greed, wasn't easy to bear. With a colossal effort, I got up and went to the kitchen, where I made coffee. The simple and quiet routine made me realize how far I had drifted from the life I had imagined for myself. But, in that moment, I knew I had no choice. I needed to start over, not because luck had favored me, but because life demanded it. With the coffee in hand, I sat at the table and began mentally reviewing everything that had happened. What would I do now? The answer seemed obvious: try to move forward. I knew I couldn't keep sinking into guilt and shame. It would be pointless to try to fix all the damage at once. What I needed were small steps. One at a time. I decided to start with my job. I couldn't go back and undo my resignation. The company, as well as the promises I made to my friends and family, were broken, but that didn't mean I should abandon everything I had achieved up to that point. My job, though simple, was still a source of income, and I needed it. I grabbed my phone and sent a message to my boss. It wasn't easy, but it had to be done. I needed to apologize for the hasty decision and explain that, although I was ashamed, I was willing to do my best to move forward and resume my work. My boss, Sandra, had always been understanding, and I knew she would give me a second chance. Her response was almost immediate. Understood, John. We'll talk tomorrow. I'll wait for you at the office. A huge sense of relief washed over me. I knew this was the first step in regaining some stability. Going back to work wouldn't solve all my problems, but it was a start. The rest of the morning passed in silence, with my mind still trying to organize the pieces of this puzzle called life. I didn't know how things would turn out or how to rebuild the trust of the people around me, but I knew I had to try. I had already lost so much in such a short time. In the afternoon, I went to the supermarket. It seemed like a simple gesture, but it was an important step. I had never paid attention to the little things in daily life, and now, as I walked through the aisles, I felt more aware of how distant my former life seemed. The fact that I was there, with a tight budget, reminded me of how I had neglected the small joys and small commitments. Buying bread, choosing fruit, checking the prices. That was what I had now. The big dream was out of reach, but life, somehow, was still there to be lived. When I returned home, I sat on the couch and took a deep breath. It was the first step toward a new beginning. I didn't know what the future held, but for now, the only thing I could do was try. Try to fix what I had broken. Try to be a better person, and, most importantly, try to be honest with those around me. The journey would be long, but I knew I couldn't run away from reality forever. The mistake I had made was big, but it taught me something crucial. It's not luck that shapes our lives, it's effort, patience, and the ability to learn from our mistakes. Now, more than ever, I had to move forward. The sun shone brighter the next day, and with it came a sense of lightness that I hadn't felt in the past few days. It was as if, for the first time, I was beginning to understand what really mattered. It wasn't the millions of dollars, nor the promises made in a moment of excitement. What I was learning, little by little, was that life has its own rhythms, its own challenges, and it's not worth chasing an easy solution for everything. I spent the day reflecting on what had happened. Sandra's words, my boss, echoed in my mind. She said that everyone makes mistakes, and the most important thing is to learn from them. I knew my lack of humility had led me to act rashly. I wanted everything at once, without considering the consequences. I was so obsessed with an idea of success that I ignored the values that had always guided my life until then: patience, honesty, and constant effort. As I had breakfast, I began to think about the future. How could I use this mistake to my advantage? What could I learn to avoid making the same mistakes in the future? I knew my journey wouldn't be easy, but now, instead of sinking into guilt, I needed to learn to make wiser choices, to focus on what really mattered. Reflecting on greed was one of the hardest parts of the process. I realized that the idea of making money quickly and changing my life without effort was a reflection of a mindset that made no sense. The real reward comes from hard work, from building a legacy, not from chance. The mistake I made showed me that greed can be destructive, that it can make you lose sight of what really matters and, in the end, leave you emptier than before. I spent the night writing in my journal. It was a simple exercise, but essential for organizing my thoughts and seeing clearly where I was and where I wanted to go. As I wrote, the words began to flow more easily, as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I was finally accepting the fact that life doesn't work the way we want it to. Instead, it challenges us to be better, to surpass ourselves, to learn from our mistakes and move forward. I also reflected on what it meant to be humble. What does humility really represent? For me, humility became the ability to accept our mistakes without wanting to hide or run from them. It was the recognition that we are not perfect, and that perfection is not the goal. The goal is to learn and evolve. I knew I would have to face many difficulties along the way, but now, at least, I was at peace with my own humanity. The lessons I learned from this experience are immeasurable. When you lose everything, you gain something more valuable: perspective. I had placed my hope in something that didn't exist, and now, with my feet on the ground, I could clearly see what really mattered. I knew it wouldn't be easy to regain the trust of those around me, especially my family, but I also knew that small gestures of honesty and constant effort could, little by little, recover what I had lost. No more empty promises, but concrete actions, made with dedication and commitment. That would be my path. It was time to take the next step. The past couldn't be changed, but the future was still in my hands, and, contrary to what I had imagined, this new perspective on life no longer scared me. On the contrary, it gave me strength. In the days that followed, I began to realize that, although the damage I caused wasn't small, it wasn't permanent. Contrary to what I thought, the relationships I feared I had lost were stronger than I imagined. Sure, there was still distrust and frustration, but for some reason, it seemed that people were willing to give me a second chance, an opportunity to correct my mistakes. The first step was to reconnect with my family. I tried to explain what happened without hiding or blaming anyone, just my own lack of judgment. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was ready to put in the necessary effort. What bothered me most was the feeling of having failed the people I loved. My empty promises to my parents, my siblings, and even my friends now seemed like an unbearable weight. I called my mom. She was silent on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I thought she wouldn't speak to me. But then she took a deep breath and said, "I know you made a mistake, John. I know it wasn't your intention, but you need to learn to deal with things differently. We can't live in a dream, my son. Life is much more than that." It was simple advice, but profound. She was right. I had lived in a fantasy for so long, fueled by promises and desires for instant wealth. Now, the only thing I needed to do was be honest with others and, more importantly, with myself. Over the weeks that followed, I slowly rebuilt my relationships, not in a miraculous way, but consistently. When I said I was going to do something, I did it. When I made a mistake, I admitted it. No more excuses. No more illusions that I could escape the consequences of my actions. Life, with its difficulties, also offered a chance for learning, and I was determined to take it. I also made a point to reconnect with work. Sandra, my boss, was patient and helped me reintegrate into the professional environment without too many demands. The job wasn't what I had imagined, but it was what I needed to keep going. Every day, I dedicated myself to my position with a renewed vision. Success didn't come from easy money or empty promises, but from consistency, effort, and commitment to what is real. I entered a cycle of recovery where every action, no matter how small, represented a step toward restoring my credibility. There were no grand gestures, but rather small everyday acts of responsibility and dedication. I knew this wouldn't be quick, that it would take time for trust to be fully restored, but that was the way. I also needed to learn to trust myself again. As much as there were moments of doubt and frustration, the feeling that I was heading in the right direction gave me strength to keep going. I began to understand that recovery wasn't just about fixing the damage I caused, but about being a different person, someone who, finally, understood the true importance of the small daily victories. Little by little, I began to feel that I was, indeed, recovering something valuable, my peace of mind. It would no longer be about the money I could have made, but about who I was becoming. The painful lessons that life gave me were transforming into something stronger than I could ever imagine. Over time, I began to realize that not only were my personal relationships being rebuilt, but something within me was changing. I was no longer the same man who, in a moment of impulse, believed that a simple lottery could change his life forever. What I had lost in one way seemed to be recovered in a different, deeper manner. True change didn't come from an unexpected prize, but from the way I stood up again after the mistake. That's when new opportunities appeared, things I had never imagined. Perhaps because of my renewed approach to work, or maybe because of the way people started to notice that I was taking my life seriously again. Doors began to open. They weren't grand promises of wealth, but real possibilities for growth and development. Sandra invited me to join a project the company was starting, something that seemed challenging, yet exciting at the same time. It wasn't a leadership position, nor one that would make me rich quickly. But it was in an area I truly enjoyed. It would be a collective effort with long-term results, but it was exactly what I needed: genuine work, without shortcuts. At first, I was surprised by the proposal. I remembered how much I had once longed for: quick success, immediate recognition. But this new opportunity seemed more in line with the kind of person I was becoming. I was no longer seeking fame or fortune. Now, I wanted to build something sustainable, something that would truly be mine. Moreover, something within me had changed. Over the months, I reconnected with what had always motivated me: the desire to help others. Not with empty promises, but with concrete actions. I began to get involved in local causes, offering to help with community projects. Money, power, fame, all those desires started to lose the weight they once held for me. I realized that my greatest value lay in how I impacted those around me, in how I could make a difference in my immediate circle. During one of these community initiatives, I was introduced to a small group of young entrepreneurs. They were starting their own businesses, but facing many obstacles. What caught my attention was the passion with which they spoke about their projects, but also the lack of resources and knowledge to move forward. I saw there an opportunity to use my experience gained from my mistakes, my new perspective on what truly mattered, to help those young people grow. It was at that moment that the real reward began to appear. Not easy money or a life of luxury, but the satisfaction of knowing I could share what I had learned and help others build a better future. This was the kind of success that truly fulfilled me. Each day seemed to bring new discoveries about myself and what it really meant to live a full life. Although things weren't perfect, there was a sense of peace that came from accepting my failures, being willing to correct my mistakes, and having a genuine desire to grow honestly. Then, something unexpected happened. My former boss, Sandra, offered me a more strategic position within the company. It was an opportunity that came about because of the project I was involved in. She believed that I could contribute with the experience I had gained, not just as an employee, but as someone who understood the value of hard work and the lessons learned from failure. This offer was a major milestone, not for the position itself, but because it represented everything I had learned up to that point: the value of a fresh start, the importance of making the right choices, and, above all, the reward of patience and dedication. I knew that from that point on, it wouldn't be about achieving easy wealth, but about building a solid and meaningful career, step by step. The new opportunity I had was not just a chance to regain control of my life, but also to be the person I truly wanted to be. Now, I was ready to face the challenges ahead, with a clearer vision of what mattered, and the certainty that the greatest prize I could have was the ability to make a difference, to help transform the lives of others.